Everybody, this is Draymond for the 9:26 slate. We're gonna have a four-game slate that starts at 6:35 Eastern. We just have four games in this particular situation. Overall, this slate is not very good, but when it comes to pitching or anything, but it's still got some guys that we can take a look at. The stackable teams are going to be Baltimore, Boston, Atlanta, most likely, and then whichever of Toronto or New York that you dislike, I guess, in this particular matchup. Overall, it's kind of a wonky slate because the two decent pitchers are going up against each other, which is Gosman and Severino for Yankees and Blue Jays. But no, I mean, you don't typically want to use pitchers against them. And then, like, the bad teams are playing each other, like Pittsburgh and Cincinnati. And then, of course, you have Atlanta, who's facing Washington, who's pretty bad. Atlanta's obviously good. And Baltimore and Boston are playing. So it's a very strange little slate here. But overall, I've got some options here I think are going to be useful in this particular situation. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the players that I do like here. For pitching, we basically just have a couple of different options. Obviously, Kevin Gossman is going up against the Yankees. Now, he's had two games over 38 fantasy points against the Yankees this season in the two games he's pitched, and he tends to get the strikeouts as well, but it has been a little bit since he's pitched against them, and they may be hitting the ball better than they were back when he played against them earlier on in August, and then I think way earlier in the season was the other one. So it's been strangely enough, he's been pretty good against the Yankees, and he probably gets enough strikeouts that you could probably just roll him through here. But still a strange, it's like, oh, do you really want to throw him against the Yankees? I don't know. But anyhow, the next guy that I like is Luis Severino. He's going against Toronto. Now, obviously, this is not a great option either. But versus the Toronto this season, he's had three games over 27 fantasy points. And he's had 9, 8, and 6 strikeouts in those three games. So again, he's been pretty good against this particular team, and so he does have some upside in this particular matchup. Then we're going to look at Bryce Elder, who's going against Washington. He's scored 26 and 32 fantasy points against Washington this season, and he doesn't usually get enough strikeouts to be super worthwhile, but he's been good in the three starts for Atlanta, including a game against Washington a couple of days ago. Now, he started the season off with a start against Washington where he scored 26, and then he had a couple off not so great games. The only real risk with him is he doesn't tend to go too deep in the game, but they're not trying to make him go too deep, so the quality start situation and also getting the win, it should be easier in this particular matchup, but overall, I still think that he's a little bit risky in the quality start situation. But if you want to save money off of Severino or Gossman, you just don't trust those guys, then he's probably the top option available as another option. The only real other option is Ronzi Contreras for Pittsburgh. He hasn't been particularly great, but he has some good games here. And in two games against Cincinnati, he scored 46 and 18 fantasy points. As you can see, that he's very all over the place with the strikeouts. But in his last game against Cincinnati, he had 3 strikeouts, and the one before that he had 7. So it's really hit or miss here. But he hasn't been giving up a ton of earned runs, with the exception of a couple of different games where he's just really bad. But so he's kind of in a strange place. I don't know that I love him, but he's just somebody you could potentially take against kind of a bad team. And it is good that they're playing this game in Pittsburgh and not Cincinnati, because it would make it much more difficult to make that choice. And then I'm just going to mention Chase Anderson, who he's only had a couple games this season, and 6 games total. 4 of those he's been over 20 fantasy points, and they are the last 4. 3 of the games he's pitched against St. Louis, and he finally had a good game against them. But he's, he doesn't get too deep in the game, but he has been getting about a strikeout at inning, which is better than some of the options on this particular slate. But overall, I don't like him, but, if you are desperate, then you could kind of come down to him. The other 3 options are Lyles, Abbott, and Seabold, and they've all 3 just been absolutely atrocious. So not anybody that I really want to consider here. At catcher and first base, Adley Rutschman is the first guy I'm going to mention here for Baltimore against Boston. He's in a good spot here, and he's been hitting the ball pretty well. He's very boom or bust, though. But his price is only $3,100, so regardless of what pitcher you pay for, you'll be able to afford him. Vlad Jr. hasn't been quite as good as of late. He's averaging about 12 fantasy points a game. He's also been kind of boom or bust, where he's having some 25 and 30-point games, but he's still getting hits almost every game and scoring some fantasy points at least. And so he's definitely worth taking a look at. And then Ryan Mountcastle for Baltimore is another guy I like here. He's actually been pretty solid as of late. He doesn't have any giant games, but he's been hitting the ball pretty well. And then I'm going to mention Joey Menendez for Washington. Bryce Elder is not a very good pitcher, but he has been pretty decent lately. But again, Menendez has been extremely good since he's been playing, and he seems to always just roll under the radar, and his price isn't all that bad on this particular slate. So that's who I got as catcher and first base. At second base, I have three options for you. One being Gleyber Torres. He's actually been really good lately, and so I think he's a top option at second base, and his price isn't too extreme. Whit Merrifield's another option here for Toronto. He's averaging 11 fantasy points the last 10 games, but he's been extremely boom or bust, so you have to be a little bit careful with him, but his price is really good. And then finally, Kevin Newman. Now, he's averaging about 9 fantasy points a game, but he's had some pretty solid games lately, and he's hitting the ball pretty well. He's one of the few guys on the Pirates that are still trying to hit the ball, hit well, for that matter, or try, actually. Then if we go to third base, we have several good options here. Rafael Devers, obviously, is a top option at $3,800. He's just been pretty solid lately. He's hitting the ball pretty good, and I don't think there's any super negative about him, and he's in a nice plus matchup here. Austin Riley has finally gotten out of his slump for the most part, and he's hitting the ball better, but he's still not hitting great, but he is home run potential in this particular matchup against Washington. And then we have Brian Hayes. Where'd he go? Now, he has not been playing very good as a player, but he's still hitting the ball okay when he has played. He took a couple games off here and there, but he's still hitting and getting hits. He's just not playing good defense now. And then Josh Donaldson, somebody to mention for Toronto, or for the Yankees rather, against Toronto. He's been pretty solid as of late, getting hits in almost every game recently, and so I think he's in a pretty good spot here against Toronto. For the shortstop situation, we have Xander Bogaerts for Boston. Now, he's been extremely boom or bust lately, but he's still in a good spot against Baltimore. This should be a high-scoring game. Then Gunnar Henderson is another guy I like. He's actually been extremely good lately, with the exception of the last 3 or 4 games. He's been in a pretty good stretch of solid games, and if he can have another good one, then he'll definitely pay off here. This is a high expectation game for a run scored, should I say. And then Bo Bichette for Toronto is in a good spot here. His price is a little bit higher, but he's been hitting the ball really well as of late, and I think he's in a solid spot for this particular matchup. Overall, third base or shortstop is not very good today because there's just not much beyond that. I mean, you could look at Von Grisham too, but he's been extremely bad lately. You could also look at Oswaldo Cabrera, who on this particular slate, on FanDuel, he's actually listed as shortstop and third base. I think he's outfielder on DK, but he's been hitting the ball extremely well as of late. In the outfielders, we got Aaron Judge, who's trying to get his 61st home run. He just hasn't hit one in the last few games, and so if this is, whatever game it is, he's going to probably have a pretty massive scoring game. Cedric Mullins is another guy I like here. Now, his price has come down some. He's only $3,000, and he finally got out of the little slump that he was in, so I really like him in this particular matchup. Alex Verdugo, he's averaging 9 fantasy points a game. Not quite as good as I'd like him to be, but he's been having some really big games lately. George Springer is a guy that's averaging almost 16 fantasy points a game. He feels like an auto lock based on his recent production, where he's only had a couple games under 10 fantasy points. They're actually really under 15. He's just hitting the ball really well, and it's not even off a bunch of home runs. It's just a couple here and there. And then we've got Stanton for the Yankees, who's been a really boomer bust, but when he booms, he can really boom. And then we got Tommy Pham for Boston. He's only averaging 9 fantasy points a game last 10 games, and he's very boomer bust, but he has tendency to have a couple home run game. Austin Hayes looks pretty good here, but he's been extremely bad lately. This is just a really good plus matchup for him. It's not that he's not been hitting the ball, it's just he's not getting much beyond just the base hits. Michael Harris is my final option at the outfield situation. He's actually absolutely been solid as of late, pretty much all season since he started playing. He's been somebody you could definitely throw in here, and his price, while it is $4,100, he's pretty safe because he just gets hits in good situations, especially with Ronald Acuna out. So with that said, I think we have a pretty solid slate of options. Actually, it's kind of a strange slate because there's only 4 games, but I think that the scoring will be pretty solid in this. Pitcher might be a little all over the place, but I don't even know how to even decide what pitcher, or at least on FanDuel you have to pick one. On DraftKings you actually have to pick 2, which seems more daunting over there. But that said, thank you guys for liking, commenting, and subscribing. If you have any comments or questions about any of the players, feel free to leave it below. And have a nice day, guys.